Hello, my darlings, and welcome back to another episode of The Library is Open. A little bit later this week, I'm afraid. I've had a bit of faffing about at the start of the week. I say faffing about like I wasn't doing anything important. That's debatable, depending on what you deem as important. But anyway, I've had a busy couple of days, so that explains why. I hope you're all doing well. As we enter August. Who could have foreseen, that we would still be in this situation in August? Well, anybody, with less than 100% faith in whatever government they have to be ruled by, which, I'm in the UK, so say no more. But I hope you're all doing okay and staying safe. It's still a very weird time. It's going to be, indefinite, the amount of time that we'll be in this situation. So hopefully we're all managing to find a way to keep active and keep our brains alive and so on and so forth, and just look after ourselves and each other. So for that purpose, I've been reading like a demon lately, for real. I feel like I go through stages, or rather I have. It might not seem like it on this channel, but of just reading, but sort of not, but like half reading almost, in a way, where I'm just sort of going through the motions of it, and then sometimes where it almost feels like an imperative necessity, where I'm almost reading against myself. Both are fine, both are pleasurable in their own ways. But yeah, last week or so, it's seriously been, I'm just reading, which is lovely, actually. So one of the things I have been reading, to get to the point of video, is this, which is Broken Jade by Paul Chan. Now, I think this is a generic printing by the website that I ordered it from, which I'm not going to mention which one because I don't do promotions, paid or otherwise. But yes, I'm not sure what the cover would look like. I've noticed it's quite difficult to get, because this is an Aussie book, Australian book, I should say. And it's quite difficult to get a hold of a lot of Australian fiction in the UK without ordering, especially. So I'm wondering if it's that, or it could even have been self-published. I'm not sure. Not that there's anything wrong with that. And the reason I bought this book was because my friend, a little shout out to Maria. Hi Maria, in case she watches this, who lives in Sydney. We did RMA together. She tagged me in a picture of this book on the Instagram because the author, Paul Chan, is actually her dad's name as well, which is lovely. So I thought, wow, that it felt a bit almost divine, I suppose. So I ordered a copy and said, hey, I've got your dad's book. And it was a little titter, a little moment. So, but actually, it turned out to be a really, really nice reading experience, a really sort of soothing and calm one, which almost sounds like a backhanded compliment, by which I'm saying that the book isn't challenging, which, I mean, it's not. It's very easy to read. I think I did it in about a day and a half, but that's not a critique, because I think, for every book that takes us months to read because it's so in-depth, there's a book that takes us a day to read, and both are equally valid, because I don't think experience or worth is sort of bound up with the time taken. So a little bit about what this is about, which I'm really interested in. So this was written to coincide with when equal marriage became law in Australia. And it was finally published in 2020, so this year. And it's about... It's looking at, for those Australian people that are in the lgbtqia community who have now acquired marriage rights, that's great for them. What happens with their backstories, what are the knock-on effects of other people in their families? So we kind of follow the story of Justin Wong, who's a lawyer in Sydney. And he has a partner. They've been together for quite a few years. And the book sort of deals in the opening with him, I say opening to first third, of him coming out to his mum, Madeline, who is from and still lives in Malaysia, where she's very well to do. He has two other brothers as well, both of whom are married with wives. And it's about how she sort of has to come to terms with that. So we mostly follow her story, and it sort of delves back and forth into, you know, experiences that she's had in her life, and also, you know, some of the culture, both societal and religious, ethno-religious, of Malaysia, which, you know, is somewhere that I don't know an awful lot about, particularly outside of like Kuala Lumpur. And this is about a town called Terengganu, which is Madeline's hometown, and also, you know, a sort of fairly affluent-y suburb. What's really interesting is it sort of goes through Madeline's friendship circle and what that looks like, and it's very strong, almost sort of matriarchal, although that's not necessarily made like really obvious in the book, as in that's what it's about. And then also about you know, what societal mores are in that society, what respectability looks like, gossip, you know, and also like the church community, which is actually pretty close to sort of you know, like Anglican the Anglican religion and the Anglican church community, and so on and so forth. So Madeline discovers the truth about Justin, and she has to sort of reconcile this with the world that she lives in as quite a, you know, well-to-do society matron. You know, she has these two other friends who are great as well, who are like, there's like a trio of them, and she has to sort of negotiate Justin coming out to her. And she flies to Sydney to, you know, sort of, she goes with the intention of basically changing his mind. She even flirts vaguely with conversion therapy, which is a, you know, it's a really hot button issue at the moment that is still not, to the best of my knowledge, banned in the UK yet. So, which is crazy, because conversion therapy does not work and is, in my opinion, well, no, not even in my opinion, it's torture and abuse and should be banned under criminal law by every country in the world. But anyway, luckily that comes to nothing, because there was a bit when it got to the conversion therapy bit where I was like, ugh, it was becoming a little bit like, oh, is it going to be like a boy erased scenario? Because, you know, there's some things that I'm aware of that I don't necessarily want to read about, because I find them quite traumatic to read about. But luckily that doesn't go anywhere. So she has a very difficult time sort of coming to terms with her child, while still balancing that notion of what does it mean to be a parent, and particularly a mother, you know, by which I mean the word mother and the sort of female lineage is so pregnant in our society with meaning and implication, both for mothers and children. You know, in terms of what their behaviours are supposed to be. And, you know, they are policed by larger society, which is a whole big other issue. So she's trying to balance those two things at the same time, while also reflecting on her relationship with her husband and, you know, where she came from, the influence of her ancestors. So it's really interesting. And I think what makes this work is that it is told with heart, for a start. You know, a little poem there. And towards the end, you know, Madeline comes to terms with Justin, as do the rest of the family, and so on and so forth, and she learns from the influence of the new and the modern and what have you, whilst not abandoning her old beliefs. What's quite nice is that's all quite predictable, but it's nonetheless a nice read for that. Not only because of, you know, it deals with the Malaysian culture, but also because it sort of reminds us that, well, this might feel like a story that is, you know, well worn. You know, it might almost be, not my words, it might almost be seen as a cliche, the sort of coming out family story. But I think what we have to remember is so little material, relatively speaking, still exists about this or these experiences, by which I mean the community more generally. So, I mean, in the UK and the US, we probably think we've seen like a plethora of these stories over the years. And we're familiar with what that narrative is, and it works out quite nicely and so on and so forth. But um, it what we have to remember is that if we're all familiar with those narratives, it's because there aren't exponential copies of it, which is why, similar to films, I suppose, in a way, there's a lot of stuff in the LGBTQIA canon of film and TV that have similar themes, and it's because I believe that we haven't yet developed a full dossier of those films, so every one that comes out is still important, and particularly ones that don't have, white, British or American or Australian people as their primary characters. That's still something of an anomaly. And also how, sometimes in our own heads we can be accidentally or rather subconsciously prejudiced against thinking, oh, people of this faith, this culture, this religion, blah, 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 are going to be inherently anti-queerness, and that's not necessarily the case. Maybe that's a popular narrative that sows disparity and division between communities to divide and conquer, but actually that needn't be the experience of people within that community. So yeah, another thing that this does quite nicely is we follow Justin's story as well, although it's more of Madeline's book in a way, which is actually quite nice, and I sort of wonder whether, or rather to what extent, the Paul Chan, who's the author, whether this represents any of his own experience. There's no real information about that, unfortunately. And yes, but when Justin goes to university, which is when he ends up moving to Sydney to begin with, he joins like an LGBTQ, well, at the time it would have been LGBT group, and it's about how he experiences, people interacting with him as a non-white person, from people who have an Asian fetish, who sexualise his being because he's Malaysian, to people, treating him in a derogatory way because of that, So that was really nice to touch on as well, because that's still like a massive hot button thing in the queer community. There is, not from everyone, obviously. These things are never from everyone, but in terms of a systemic way that non-white, cis, or abled bodies are judged, particularly as, potential romantic partners and so on and so forth. That was really nice, and I sort of wonder whether that was informed at all by Paul Chan's experience. I must just explain as well the title. I meant to say this as well. So Broken Jade is a piece of jewellery, a jade bracelet that was given to Madeline by her mother, which is broken. It's sort of symbolic in the book about a sort of fracturing of relationships, and then eventually given back to Justin by Madeline at the end as a sort of, I guess, a healing of the rift. So it's been fixed. It acts as a sort of quite gentle and fairly obvious metaphor for what's going on in the book. And that's sort of where it takes its title from. So, things can be shattered, but they can also be put back together, and goodness knows, in this current climate, across the board, that's something we need to know. In fact, I think this is slightly related, but I saw on Instagram today that Britt Bennett, who wrote The Vanishing Half that I talked about a few weeks ago, and also The Mothers, which I've also read now, did an interview with Maxine, and she was talking about how the pandemic has shown us just how quickly and how completely the world can undergo a radical change in a very short space of time. So actually what that proves is that everything and everyone is capable of that change. So, sometimes people sort of say, I couldn't possibly ever change, this will never be any different. Well, it can be done. So if it can be done, then it becomes about who is choosing not to allow that to happen. Because everything in our lives has changed. like almost overnight. So clearly that's possible. You know, slight segue there, but I think it bears some has some bearing on this. So yeah, this is a lovely little read, very easygoing, very sort of, I want to say it's almost cozy crime or Mills and Booney, and I don't mean the subject matter, but in the sense that it's really easy to read and just like plough through. Let's do myself. Because it's gentle, you know, so there's no real cliffhangers, or there's no real way that we don't suspect that everything's going to work out alright in the end. It's almost a foregone conclusion, but it's nonetheless nice an experience for that. And once again, really good to read stuff about how, you know, different issues intersect culturally in terms of sexuality, gender, so on and so forth, particularly in underserved narratives and cultures, which we don't often get to hear much about, or rather we think we do, but actually when it comes down to it, we don't know an awful lot. So yeah, that is Broken Jade by Paul Chan. Slightly shorter episode, but I think, you know, say what you gotta say and get off the stage. That's my tip du jour. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please sound off down below as per usual, or give it a like if you liked it. If you didn't, that's alright too. And yes, leave me a comment, tell me what you're reading, tell me what your reading's like at the moment. You know, are you speeding through it, or can you not find yourself in that place where you're able to turn off and really get engrossed in a book? Let me know, because I think both are happening for everyone at certain times, and both are valid. Of course they are. We're all dealing with this as best we can. But okie doke, so let's close that library up. Put your library card safe, whack a face mask on, and let's call it a day. Much love to you all. Thank you so much for watching, liking, and subscribing. I do appreciate you all very much, and I'll be back with another episode within the week. Take care of yourselves and each other. Mwah.